What's up? Welcome to the Existential Stoic podcast. Are you trying to just live a better life, maybe be a better person, find ways that you can improve yourself, improve the world around you? Well, you're in luck because today we're going to talk about how to practice Stoicism in daily life. I'm Danny, and here with my buddy Randy. What's up, Randy?
Yo, Danny. How good is it?
My
Oh
mouth
man.
is ahead of my brain.
Oh
Good.
yeah. Oh man. This is gonna be a good one. I
Yeah,
can
it'll be
tell.
good. I'm
Yeah.
excited. Let's just keep
Yep.
going.
All right. So
Yeah, so
actually I have been looking for how to practice stoicism in my daily life. Because you know why? Because I've read a couple books on stoicism, listened to a couple podcasts on stoicism, and especially when stuff's going bad, these stoic principles sound pretty darn awesome.
they are good. And you know what's funny? Like, I think this is true with like philosophy in general. Like, you know, these people have been thinking about this stuff all the time, but it's like not always easy to put into practice when you're reading the books, or it's not always clear how you're supposed to. Like, when the Taoists say, like, like, don't go against the, natural course of the universe, like, what does that mean? I mean, it's like hard sometimes to know. So it is helpful to kind of get like key points, I think, and think about how do I actually implement this and what does it look like? Yeah.
Hmm. Well, I'm glad you brought that up because we're actually going to go over an article that has a few points, and then we're
Boom.
going to give our own perspective on this whole shebang.
Yeah. So let's look at it. How to practice stoicism in daily life. We'll put this article in the show notes. I'll start with the first one. Develop an internal locus of control. And they give the quote from Epictetus, man is disturbed not by things, by the views he takes of them, which is like a really good point, right? I mean, our world is literally a construct of how we interpret it. So what are we disturbed by if not our thoughts, feelings, and interpretation of things rather than actually the things themselves?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I was reading some. Oh, there. Okay, so I was reading this book called Healing Back Pain, and it was talking about these guys who, in one of the giant wars that happened, it was either World War II or Vietnam or something like that. They actually, like, once they got maimed, they got injured and taken out of war, they didn't even need any pain medications for it. They got their leg blown off or something like that, didn't even need any pain medication. It's like,
What?
how is that even, yeah, how is that even possible? And because most of us would be like, that would ruin my life if I was crippled, that would be the end of everything. I would just off myself. And it's like, well, in these people's worlds, they were every day going out into this very, very scary situation where they never knew if they were going to live or die. And then as soon as they were injured to where they couldn't fight, all of a sudden that burden's gone. Like, all the
Oh
difficulties
yeah.
pretty much gone. They can breathe easy for the first time in months or years, however long it was. And they saw this in a whole bunch of people during these wars. And it's very shocking, but it comes down to not exactly what happened to them, because you take another person who has their leg blown off and that's the end of their life. But
Yeah.
it's their interpretation of it. One person, it ruined their life. The other person, it saved them from a world of misery.
That's crazy too, because when you think about it, like, the anxiety, the stress, the fear every day doing that, probably you're also probably hungry, sore. I mean, anyway, all the time. So it's like that happens. It's like just a totally different way of looking at things, right? It's like
Yeah.
but it's a good point though. I think this is it. Like, and I think in order to actually incorporate this into your life, it takes time and practice to identify, first of all, what you're feeling, what's going on, and then remind yourself that it's just an interpretation. It's just a way of looking at things. Like, it's funny, like most of us people fear death, but we also see death all the time around us. It's part of life. So it's like, why do we fear? Well, we fear because of unknown, right? We fear because of our imagination of it. It has nothing to do with actually dying. It has to do with like
Mm-hmm.
kind of what we think will happen. So it's really, I think, thinking about this for like, anger and stuff like that, just recognizing it and remembering like, this is a way kind of prompted to respond to the world. I don't have to respond this way. I can look at it differently. I can see things differently. I can be empathetic, and it makes it easier to deal
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so many good points there that I want to touch on, but we only have so much time in this episode today. So one thing that I did want to say
with.
was there was Byron Katie, who wrote Loving What Is. She said something along the lines of, when I believe my thoughts, I suffer. When I don't believe them, I don't suffer. And it's like, so like, no matter what happens to you, it's your thoughts about that cause the suffering.
Oh
And
yeah.
so when you believe those thoughts, true or not, that causes suffering. If you don't believe those thoughts, if you just recognize those thoughts, they may not be true, and there goes the suffering.
Dude, how many times? Have you thought something was impossible, got really stressed or worried about something, and then you actually are forced to do it finally, and it's like easy and the weight's lifted off? Like I'm
You
thinking
mean
like,
just today? Because that's
yeah,
probably like at least a handful.
right. This morning 15 times. No, but like
Okay.
so many things in my life I can point back to. Just dealing with student loans. I thought it was going to be impossible at first. I was stressed. I didn't want to answer phone calls. I was scared of the mail. Then you deal with it and you realize it's possible to take care of. There's always ways around things. There's always ways to deal with them slowly. And it's like, it's so funny because our imagination just throws us off completely, you know?
Yeah. And then the other thing about this is just like the dichotomy of control, because I think this is what they were pointing out a bit
Yeah,
with this,
yeah,
which is like you need to just focus on the things that are within your control. Like anything that you don't have an influence on, let it go. Like, oh
yeah.
my gosh, I was on vacation not long ago and I saw this guy. I was staying at one of these budget hotels and it had free breakfast. And so like every day for breakfast started like 6 in the morning. Every day, free breakfast. He loaded up his plate with the breakfast and then he was sitting right in front of that TV with the news on, just downloading that garbage into his brain and the
Yeah,
other garbage into his mouth. 6 a.m. first thing in the morning. I was like, man, that is a terrible way to start your day. But he
yeah,
was like going to it. And it's like all of that stuff that he's watching completely out of his control. Doesn't have
yeah.
any control over it whatsoever, but guaranteed it's going to impact him.
But what's within his control is, does he sit down and watch that?
Hmm.
Does he do that first thing in the morning? These are all choices you're making. And I think that's the important thing. It's like the way you look at the world, the way you respond to things, that's in your control. So you have to think about like, what choices am I making and how are they impacting how I'm feeling? If social media is stressing me out, you don't have to look at it. There's no reason to. It's like
Hmm.
that's just, but you have to be mindful of that. All right.
Hmm. Okay, so I'll give the second one. We'll go
All right.
back and forth. The second one is guard your time. And the quote is from Seneca. It says, we're tight fisted with property and money, yet think too little of wasting time, the one thing about which we should all be toughest misers.
I like this one a lot.
Yeah, we're only given, the amount of time that we have on this earth. Money, property, those things can come and go. Time, only a little bit. Marcus Aurelius said, "Stop living like you got 10,000 years to live,
Yeah.
because we're all going to die before
We
you
have
know it."
we have one chance. We're all going to die. And the funny thing is, we're also prone to take things for granted, or to think what we're doing is so important, and we fail to see the rest of the important things in our lives and the things that might enrich us. We focus on money, we focus on wealth, we focus on situation instead of looking at like, what can I actually do? What's actually really important to me? What actually makes my life valuable? We don't even know these things because we don't even ask the questions. It's
Hmm.
crazy.
Yeah, this is one area that I've been doing a lot of work on recently, in two ways. So one is just saying no to opportunities, to people, to things like that, because I still have a hard time doing it. But like
Yeah.
now I at least I'm aware I have a hard time doing it, so I can just be like, I need to just say no. And then I'm like, how can I say no without lying? That's the next step that I'm at. So like that's one part of it. And then the other part is just I think it's like not getting detaching myself from people and situations that are not good for me. Because
Yeah.
like I was always like, well, doing these things that I didn't want to do, going these places I didn't want to go, being around people I didn't want to go. I was like, yeah, but I'm really just, it's just a few hours, it's just a day, it's just this. And then I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't know if I have 5 days or 5 years or 50 years or more,
Yeah.
but it's like, do I want to waste my time doing it with that person, that situation, that thing I don't want to be doing? Nah, not really. Especially when I have the choice, uncomfortable as I may be making that choice, I still
Yeah.
have that choice.
Well, that's what you got to remember, right? Is it's your choice, right? And I think I've seen so many people that are miserable at their jobs and they're like, well, you can't change it now or whatever. And it's like, at least I have a job. And it's like, well, no, because you're still going there every day. You're giving them your time. You could be doing that time doing something you really like. You could be happy. There's so many other things you could do. So really, it's your choice. You have to really keep that in mind. And I think you're right. Saying no is a great way to start exercising that responsibility over your time and keeping in mind of the value of it. That's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. Should we do number three?
That's
All right. This one's interesting too. Don't outsource your happiness. And they actually have a quote from Marcus Aurelius, which is, I have often wondered how it is that every man loves himself more than all the rest of men, but yet sets less value on his own opinions of himself than on the opinions of others. It's a really interesting one. What do you
Yeah.
take from it? I'll let you start.
Well, I mean, I'm reminded of this Dave Ramsey quote: "How we spend all our time working these jobs we can't stand to get money, to buy things, to impress people we don't even like." It's just like, cut out the middleman. Stop doing
Yeah.
what you don't want to do. Stop trying to impress people you don't like. Just focus on you. Yeah.
It's the truth, though. I mean, we are. Most people are more worried about the opinions of others. They're worried about like what society thinks, what people on Instagram that they don't even know think, rather than like,
Mhm.
what do you actually think? What it actually matters to you? Is this even important to you?
Yeah.
Would you?
One of the
Go
best
ahead.
things I ever heard is your opinion of me is none of my business.
Yeah, and it's like it's
And
the
then
truth, though.
Yeah. And then also, okay, so here's another thing. I read this book by I think it was like Dr. John Gottlieb, who's like a relationship psychologist. And he wrote this book. It was called like The Man's Book to Women, where basically they locked these couple they didn't lock them up. They had like a romantic retreat for couples and they just monitored couples over weekends for like years and years and years and took all this data. And this guy with I think it's like 97% accuracy, he can determine if a couple's going to break up within 6 years.
Oh, I heard about this actually. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, yeah. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So like
Okay.
one of the top things that he said in there is uh her her emotions, her feelings are none of your responsibility. How she feels, not your responsibility. Because like and I again, if there are any women who actually listen to this show, they may not like this, but like women very a lot of their emotions, everything dictated by hormones. So they're two different people, different times of the month. And what they're going to be feeling, what they're going to be doing, a lot of that's going to be dictated by hormones going on. And so in the book, he says how she's feeling is none of your business. It's not your responsibility. And I was like, really? Because like I look back on my own relationships, how like I made it my business. If she was feeling miserable or sad or whatever, I was like, that's my problem. But he's like, no, no.
We know that's a good point too, though, is also trying to remind people that you don't have to fix things. Sometimes you just have to listen, right? Like, and
Mm.
I think that's a problem that I've always ran into, where you hear somebody's problem, and because it's somebody close to you, you want to fix it, but really
Mm-hmm.
that's not what they need. That's not
Danny,
because it's
you should
not.
have written that book because that's pretty much what
uh
he said. He was like,
Yeah,
hold her hand and listen to her.
yeah, that's all it is, right? Because that's all. I mean, everybody runs in that. You just want validation, right? On a
Yeah.
side note too, I think a good thing too to ask yourself, I think I meant to say this before, but like on counterfactuals, like ask yourself, like, would I have done the same thing if that person thought differently of me? Would I have done the same thing if I didn't think I had those obligations? That's a good way to ask yourself, like, what would I have really done in this circumstance if these pressures that I can perceive as being important weren't around? And then
Mm.
see what you would really do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great one. And also, like the self-compassion thing we've talked about, because
Yeah.
like this with don't outsource your happiness. So I look at this like you're not feeling great, you want to be happy, you're not. Well, like, you're suffering. That's life. It happens. Lots of people suffer. That's life. How can you be kindest to yourself at this moment and not relying
Yeah.
on some external thing to give you happiness? Like I've had times in my life where I thought external things dictated my happiness. I thought I needed to be in a relationship to be happy. I thought I needed a certain amount of money to be happy. I thought I needed a certain job or status
New
or whatever
things,
to
go
be
buy
happy.
stuff, right, to be happy or
Yeah,
something like, yeah.
yeah. But it's not because it's something that exists within you.
Yeah.
And if you're skillful, it's something you can access pretty much regularly.
Yeah. Which is awesome. Just takes time and work. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Number 4, stay focused when confronted with distractions. Another quote by Seneca: if a person doesn't know to which port they sail, no wind is favorable.
Oh, that's a good
That's
one
pretty
too.
good. Yeah, that's kind of like the Cheshire Cat quote that we were
Yeah,
talking about in the last episode. But yeah, staying focused, is that a stoic thing? Maybe. But I think
I
it is
think it.
important to stay focused. Absolutely.
It absolutely is a Stoic thing too, because Stoicism, I mean, they believe that like, basically the path to the flourishing life or the good life is through development of virtue and good character. And so staying
Mm.
focused on that is central for them for the good life, right? So that like there's a million
Concentrated effort. Yeah.
distractions. Yeah, there's a million distractions in the world, right? You're gonna run into all kinds of things, all kinds of problems, all kinds of like temptations, all kinds of, emotions, and staying focused on what's really important is central if you want to get to that goal, if you want to have that good life. For them, that's going to be virtue and building that character, you know, and in other contexts, it might be different. Depends on what you're doing.
Yeah. It really is important to kind of define your values and figure out what's important to you and then stick to that. Because I find oftentimes I get distracted when I'm not paying close enough attention to what's important to me. Like I forget that, you know, it happened it happened this past year where like I'm starting to live more of a situation as to like this was what I had planned to do from years ago. And I got to a point where I just got distracted because I forgot that, everything that I've been doing has led me up until here. I was just like, oh, I'm trying to do 64 different things at the same time, and they're not all progressing as fast as they should. My life is in shambles. And then, it took me a while to step back and be like, hang on, like, this is what's important to me. These are the things that I'm doing. This is where I am. Let's take it day by day. And it really helped with staying focused.
But yeah, I think this is a good point too for Stoicism, which is like, and this is why I think Stoicism is great in practice. It's just something you have to remind yourself over and over again. And they knew it. You go back to Marcus Aurelius, his journals, it's repetitive as hell because he was going back to these problems over and over because he's a human being. And I think for most of us, that's true. And this is another great point. Like, we're going to get distracted. Problems are going to arise, things are going to happen, but you got to bring yourself back to those core values of what's important, and then you'll be back on track. And as long as you keep reminding yourself of that, you don't get too off course. You can always pull yourself back. You're not in a place where life falls apart. And I think that's a crucial thing. Should we do number 5?
Yeah, that's
This is a good one too. I like toss away ego and vanity. And they have a quote from Epictetus. Throw out your conceited opinions, for it is impossible for a person to begin to learn what he thinks he already knows. This is a good one.
yeah. If you know it all, you can't learn anything.
No, you have to humble yourself, right? You have to get rid of your ego and your vanity in order to do anything well and be successful at anything, I think. It's funny, like most of our fears and stuff, I think, are tied to opinions and tied to beliefs we think we already know. But when you really go out and try to learn these things, you realize now the world's different than you thought it was.
Yeah, yeah. Like they say that the smartest man in Athens or whatever, all he ever knew was that he didn't know anything. Socrates.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And so, I think it would be interesting to go back and meet Socrates to see if he actually lives up to everyone's like
Yeah, I
expectations.
know, right? Plato's depiction of him.
Yeah. But it is interesting because every once in a while I'll end up in like this group where it's basically just like a big pissing contest. Everybody wants to see who's like big or bad. And it's just like I generally in social interactions, I don't really talk too much. So like I just listen to other people and then judge them. And so,
Yeah, right.
and so, but it's funny because it's like one dude will talk about this thing, and then the next guy will one up that, and the next guy will
Yeah,
one up that, and then one dude will just like go way the freak overboard, just like clearly lying and whatever. But
yeah.
it's just like I don't know.
But
What do
what's
they
funny though?
get? Because there's no winners in it either.
But what's funny though? When you see people doing that, all I ever think is insecurity.
Hmm.
Like you're so insecure with yourself, you feel like, people you're ostensibly friends with, you have to one up in order to be validated. Like that's what's funny. Like think about it. Like if you're secure with yourself, if you're secure with like you can be humbled. You can get rid of your ego and vanity because it doesn't matter. It's not you don't lose anything. You're fine.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
essential to this too. Just being comfortable with yourself, with who you
Mm-hmm.
are and what matters to you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so
Yeah.
funny when people get in pissing contests like that. It cracks me up.
Yeah. But also, listening to Marcus Aurelius Meditations. I never actually read the book. I've only listened to it a bunch. But it is something where he, many times in there, he's like, thank goodness that I was able to live not like I live the life of luxury. Like he's like, it's possible to live in a palace and still live kind of a stoic life. Yeah.
Yeah. Dude, he still went on. I mean, if you look at his life, he was a Roman. I mean, he had everything. He was the emperor. He was like the king of kings of that empire, at a very good point in the empire, you know? But he went on the front lines with his guys in the military. Like he went in battle. He said he put himself at risk. He also didn't dress super fancy all the time. I mean, yeah, he's sure he had some nicer things and all because of his status, but he still humbled himself all the time. And I think that's important. And you see that reflected again in his journals when you read them or listen to them. His own concerns, you see them like come up again and again in his own concern for others and stuff. And you really do see like not an ego that you would expect in someone like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Is it my next
Yeah.
one would
You're
be
number
me.
6. Yeah.
Ooh, consolidate your thoughts in writing. Again, Seneca. I guess every other quote's going to be Seneca. Uh,
Yeah.
no man was ever wise by chance. Well, true. I like this one, consolidate your thoughts in writing, because back when I was a teenager writing Dear Journal, in my little 21 Jump Street locked diary,
Nice.
uh, little did I know. Yeah, but actually, it's crazy because there's so many benefits to writing stuff down. I mean, you can consolidate your thoughts, but also you can work through difficult thoughts. You can keep important things in there. Like I can't even tell you how many things that I've found in places that I've written down, and now I've kind of compiled that into a few pages that are just like the best stuff that I've experienced in my life, and I just can read through these pages and get from that from a regular basis.
Yeah. No, I've always been thankful that like that was something I don't know why. I guess it was just impulse to do it. But like I started using journals like when I was like really young, and it's just something I've always done, and it's really helpful. And as I gotten older, I use them for I think more specific purposes, like goals or working through problems and stuff like that. But they're just great because like writing it down does it gets it out in the world. It makes it something that's not just in your head. It makes it a lot easier to reflect on ideas, to reflect on problems, to get clear about what you're doing. I think there's so many values to it. So it is important, yeah, actually doing
Mm-hmm.
it. Should we do
Mm-hmm.
number seven?
Let's.
Is stand your ground. I guess I'm getting all the different quotes from different people. So
Yeah. The
this
next
is
one will
from,
definitely be Seneca.
yeah, this is from Cato. In doing nothing, men learn to do evil. This is an interesting one
Ooh.
because like I think what was it? Aristotle said, like you can't be virtuous while asleep, right? In other words, like, you know, if you're just doing nothing, are you really doing the right thing? Are you really actually exercising virtue, or are you just not really participating? I think this is an important one to think about when you think about like character development or just like living life, like what is your values and what are your sort of what's important to you, and are you actually living up to that? Are you actually that person? And I think that's what I get from standing your ground. Like, are you actually like being the person that you want to be, that is a good person, or are you caving to opinions, other ideas, pressure, whatever?
Hmm. That is an interesting one. I mean, there's that quote, the idle hands are the devil's playground, or whatever that is.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's close.
but there's also all a man's problems come from his inability to sit still and do nothing. So you have both sides of that. What I got from that stand your ground thing was I heard something, I think from one of these books that I read often, but it was talking about how when you have like an insurmountable obstacle come up, something that you just can't get around over or whatever, you just stand your ground and you let it break over you. Because if you stand your ground, there's no place else it can go than to break over you. And that's the thing, me personally, fear the most. When there's just something that's like in my mind unbearable, I'm like, there's no freaking way I can't endure this. And it's just one of those things where it's like, you just have to endure it. And eventually you get through it and you can look back and be like, yeah, you just had to endure it. But it's like standing your ground in those moments. That's what I think of when I think of Stoics. Like, that's what I think of in terms of just standing your ground, and whatever crap life hands you, you just let it break over you, and you remain standing.
Yeah, taking responsibility for yourself and you take responsibility for, what you're responding to and how you respond. I think that's a really good way to look at it as well. So yeah, it's two nice ways to actually interpret that. Let's see if is it Seneca next.
Seneca, how about it? Who would have guessed?
He's all the even
Uh,
numbers.
I know, right? Imagine the worst that could happen.
This is
Oof,
a good one.
nothing happens to the wise man against his expectations. Well, that's not exactly true, Seneca. Sometimes life can smack you upside the head. It's happened to me a few times. But I think it's really important to imagine the worst that could happen. Uh, Tim Ferriss had an exercise of this in what was it, the 4 Hour Work Week, where he's basically like, write down your worst fears and just go down that rabbit hole, write it all down and see what it would like. And then once you write down the worst of all fears and the worst possible scenario, you write down how you can recover from that. And
Yeah,
it turned out like I had this very vague, like very worst fear that like if this happens, my life's over. And it paralyzed me for a while. Like I did not know what to do. But then I wrote it down and I was like, yeah, that sucks. And then I was
yeah,
like, well, what could I do? And once I saw that I could do stuff from it, I was like, you know what? That's really not that bad. Like my worst fear was like going to prison, living on the
yeah.
street, not having money, not having food, having everybody hate me. And then it was like, what could I do? Well, I could go to the library and read. And I was just like, hang on. Worst
Yeah.
case scenario in my life, I get to go read. This is pretty fucking awesome.
Well, that's just it. There's always a way forward, right? And I think, but this is you hit the nail on the head when you say like, I think most of us have that problem where we have this, it's a vague fear. My life will end. It'll fall apart. Well, what does that mean? Get clear about that. Actually write down what the hell you're thinking when that's the case. What is that worst case scenario? And then how can you overcome it? Because you can still overcome it. And once you get past that fear, there's really nothing to worry about. Like, it's like people get afraid of that all the time when they're doing projects. It's like, oh, what if it doesn't? Well, you can fix it. If it doesn't work that time, you can keep working on it. Whatever. There's always a way around that problem. So I think this is a really good one. They also talk about this. I think Titus talks about like that negative visualization, visualizing the problem happening 10 times, 1,000 times. And it's like also not really that bad too. Like something bad happens to you one day, like your shirt gets ripped or something. It's like if you imagine that happening 1,000 times, it's like, okay, this just happens to this shirt. Whatever. You move on. It's just this is a normal occurrence now. So I think it's another
Mhm.
way too to think about that one. It's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And eventually, I mean, eventually you're going to die. So no matter how bad things get, eventually it's going to end.
Yeah. Well, hold that thought. Let's do the last one because that's relevant.
All right. Yeah. Oh.
Marcus Aurelius. Boom. Remember that nothing endures. And Marcus Aurelius says, Alexander the Great and his mule driver both died, and the same thing happened to both. I like that. That's a good one.
Mm. Did they get really big statues of both of them made? What?
Yeah, right. No, but I
Like,
think, hey,
and this is Alexander the Great, and
and this
this
is
is
his
his
mule
mule
driver.
driver.
No, it is good that like nothing does endure. Like we all get so caught up in, worrying about like the future, what's gonna happen, all this. But the end of the day is like, when you die, you're dead. That's it. And it's hard to think about, but it's true. Like, all the money, all the shit you have, you don't take it with you. You can try to, but it's not gonna go anywhere with you. It's the same thing's gonna happen to that as you, and all these things we stress about, well, guess what? They'll end one day too, just like our lives. And I think keeping that in mind is a very stoic way of thinking because it helps you just keep in mind the reality of life and not getting caught up, I think, and then just the acceptance of death. That's part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like all these people that we're referencing, Seneca, dead. Epicurus or Epictetus, dead. Marcus
Ep-
Aurelius, dead. All of
Epicurus is
them
also
dead.
dead.
Yeah.
They're all dead.
Yeah, all of them dead. And yeah, so it's kind of like no matter what happens, you're going to die. But you have this briefest moment, this briefest of moments to actually live. And I
Yeah,
like Zorba the Greek. There's a book and a movie because he's like sometimes you just need to undo your belt and live a little bit, you know. And
yeah,
it's just like sometimes I noticed in my own life that sometimes I'm so afraid of dying I don't actually live.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And if you remember that, but I think like, reminding yourself that nothing endures can motivate you then to live because you also remember that you have a short amount of time, right? This gets back to the other one as well. And I think that can be helpful too. And also too, like our fears and stuff, they don't endure either. Everything will pass. It's like everything is momentary. It's not forever, but we always think of it as being that way. Life, feelings, emotions, problems, we think of them as just being forever when they're not. They're going to change.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah. So that's these recommendations for how to live a stoic life. I'm curious, Danny, do you have other things do you think of when you think of how to live a stoic life on daily life?
I mean, I mentioned earlier, I think central to Stoicism was virtue, right? So building character. And I think, if you're really going to live a Stoic life, I think part of that has to be, I mean, whether you want to interpret it as their virtues or your own, I think there's nothing wrong with that. But I think, really thinking about your character and what character development means is essential to Stoicism. So thinking about, how can I be a good person? What does that look like? Why is it important? And, why is that connected to happiness? Thinking about that for yourself is a really good way to start thinking about Stoicism in practice.
Mm, yeah, that's a great one. I think that for stoicism, I just like that stand your ground thing. Like that when I think of
That's a good one.
stoicism, that's what I think of. Because it's just like you're just gonna bear the uncomfortableness of life. Because there's gonna be ups, there's gonna be downs. And when there are ups, you think it lasts forever. And when there are downs, you also think it lasts forever. And I think it's just kind of grinning and bearing it, especially the bad stuff, but realizing that it builds character.
Well, I think that's part of it, right? Is that if you have the character there, if you have a good inner core, those ups and downs aren't going to affect you as much either. You're going to have more balance dealing with that. You're not going to fly off the handle with anger. You're not going to, get totally taken away by pleasure, right? You're going to have a center. And I think that's also essential to Stoicism and practicing is finding that balance, that center.
Dude, and I mean, it's also, again, I mentioned this in the last episode, but like putting it all in perspective. So, like, we
Oh
idolize
yeah.
these people like Marcus Aurelius, Socrates, all these different things. Dude, Socrates had a wife that was a nag. Okay. Marcus Aurelius, his son destroyed the Roman Empire. So,
Yeah.
like, everybody that we idolize, they also were pretty messed up too. So if you're messed up, welcome. You're in good
You're a
company.
human being, right? And I think that's part of it too. Like, you gotta remember some of the Stoics were slaves originally. I mean, they were just trying to live a good life. So I think that's the other thing. They're human beings. It happens. Like, there's gonna be stuff we face, and it's just trying to live a good life the best we can. And I think so that's why I think Stoicism is also very accessible by everyone because they were normal people. Some of them were really high up in society, some of them were very low, but they all became great by doing, you know, leading a great life, essentially.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Doing anything else? All right. So there you
Nope.
have it then. How to practice Stoicism in daily life. We'll be back later this week with a quick fix. Check us out on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Please like, share, subscribe. It'll help us out a lot. Until next time, later, Andy.
Later, Danny.